So our first workshop today is going to be led by Jesse and Gaelen. They're going to walk you through everything that you would see in a house to big distro power on a film set.
Yeah, so most of the time when you're working in a house, you're going to be working with a lot of like 15 amp and 20 amp. So pretty much 9 times out of 10, just assume everything is 15. Very few places are going to have 20. You're going to find those mostly in your bathrooms and you're like sometimes the kitchen, depending on which kitchen appliances are there. So long story short is everything is less than you think it is, so plan for that, because unfortunately you will flip the breakers, and depending on where you are in Toronto, if half the house is knob and tube, you're not going to be able to access that breaker and actually go to it. Your GFIs is going to be your ground prevention, so that way basically it's going to, so sorry, I have severe ADHD, so I'm going to actually read the definition for you of my own. So it's the ground fault circuit interrupter. Apologies, that's my bad. So basically that's going to just ensure that if there is anything over there, it'll auto switch off the specific outlet for you. So that way there is no fear for you at the breaker. So it's basically just an extra fail-safe between the fixture and the outlet. So it's the fixture, outlet, and then the breaker. So that way you're not breaking off the actual circuit. It's just that section of that portion of the house. Because you'll find sometimes the houses, MacGyvers might have wired them. So some things are connected that shouldn't be connected. However, if you do have those, you have that extra little bit of fail-safe. Then we also have our dryer and stove plugs. So they do have the same, roughly the same amperage and power outage, but obviously they're going to be different in terms of how they have their faces. Long story short, if it's a stove, the three prongs are going to be kind of like the same direction with the ground. So basically, it's going to, instead of having the 3 verticals, it's going to have the L bracket. So that's basically just to ensure that you don't accidentally swap everything together. However, with the stove ones, I have not personally run into the need for them. Because if we're not actually going off a generator and we're going off of only house power, 9 times out of 10, the scene is taking place in the kitchen, which is where the stove is going to be. So I can't actually do that and have the line straight out through the stove. So that's why 90% of the time you're going to be going through the dryer. But other than that, those are going to be your main common ones. Haven't had any severe issues, but pretty much 90 times out of 10, when you do get this, it will have some sort of joy attachment to it. It should already be done for you if you come from the rental house. So you kind of are locked in with the option of joy as you're out.
Technically, there's a stove one here that has cams on it. I make this one. White's only has one. MBS only has one in their whole stock. So you can do cam lock out from a stove and a dryer. The reason why you might want to go stove or start going stove is, yeah, you're right. Stove isn't as common, but the new NAN pulls 32.5 amps, a leg, 120 volt. So when you're doing a stove or a dryer, what happens is you have 2 hots, a neutral, and a ground. So your 2 hots on your dryer, it's a 2-pole 30. So you're going to do something like this on your stove. That's a 2-pole 50. So what happens is you have 2 50 amp lines at 120 on a stove. So technically, if you come out of a stove and you go to 2 joys, which is a very common box, you can get that box anywhere, off those joys 120, you can run 2 of those guys because they pull 32.5 amps and you have 50 amp breaker. If you come off a dryer, because it's 32.5, you'd have to dim this guy down to about 90%. So that way you're sitting at like 29 amps on a 120 line. What we're doing today actually is we're actually running off a 60 amp plug. It's one size up from a 50. So it's an industrial stove plug, usually used in like commercial environments. And that's what gives us our extra power here. And then as far as ohms go, I just wanted to go over that basically because of the different voltages that we're getting off these lights and because of the way you're using them, right now we're running 240 while we're running 255, like I said. So we're pulling way less amps than what your mathematical equations are going to be if you start doing paper amps. Because if you start doing paper amps for 208 or 240 volt, things are going to change. This whole class is actually happening again next week. And the building we're in next week is going to be 208. So the draws that are going to be coming off these lights are going to drastically change because you're going to lose 45 volts. And you got to do these math equations as well, because if you're in a house in Hamilton you might be able to pull it off a dryer. If it's an old house like this and you're pulling, like Digital Canaries, for instance, they have 257 volts running in that building on their 2 hots. It's an obscene amount. But the hydro company says it's perfectly fine. Because it's that high, those 2 amps on the dryer, you might be able to run 2 of those NANDs on a dryer. It is so close. Now, with these lights, you just need to know your Ohm's law and your basics of it. And that'll help you out getting these lights running in a regular house environment.
So AC is like your normal plugs. So your 3-prong, 2 hot ground, the normal thing, what everything usually runs off. It's the kind that your phone will go on. You're fine, your phone won't, but that's going to mostly be groundless if it's your phone charger. And then we have Joy cables. Ours is a little bit more waterproof to deal with the standards of our electrical code. So most of the time you'll get something and it can go off to Joy. That's a very standard connector. You can see these orange things all over. Almost every option has a Joy option. That's pretty easily accessible to most people, most rental houses. However, some lights don't accept Joy as its power. So thankfully our lovely Nanlux is Joy, which is a very common adapter. You can, when you rent a generator from Whites, you rent a generator from anyone, they usually will have the twist to Joy like sashed to the Jenny. That's how common it is. They just don't expect that you asked for it, they just give it to you. So then other times though, things need the cam. So our M90, because it's drawing so much more power, it does not accept the Joy. It's going to actually only take cam. So unfortunately, not everything can go from, you know, like we were talking about with the dryer and everything, it's like it can't always go off of it. But you would have to ask for those connections. So some generators will have it where it has like almost like a B-box, but it's kind of like its own little shelf of different connector options. So it goes from the twist into its little connectors, and then it'll come out with like a Joy receiver and then a bunch of cam lock. So cam locks are these guys.
And that's the twist lock, so that's the one giant.
Yeah, that's here we go, there's the twist. So basically with these guys, they all have these little nipples on the inside, and those actually perfectly go into a recession in the other, and then you have to twist it. So it's not actually connected until it is fully twisted. So basically, if anything is happening and you see lights flickering, you can tell who like a really seasoned tech is, because they immediately, instead of thinking about anything, they're running to the connectors and just ensuring everything's twisted connected. Because the flickering will only happen because it's just slightly twisting away. Sometimes these guys, just the tension, they'll just slightly start twisting away and twisting away and twisting away, and you kind of just got to bring them back. There is a way that you can kind of like counter the twist, so that way the tension inside it is like that, but not every connection will be able to retain that tension. And then with the cam, it comes in like, you know, your 5-band, which is going to be the most common, I would say, in Canada.
Most of the lock pin you'll see, like she was talking about, you have 2 styles, actually. Yeah, there's a J series, which is actually, we're the only film industry in the world that uses the ball nose, which is what you're familiar with. LA, New York, everywhere in the world except us uses J series, which is a safer, better cam lock. If you talk to ESA, all 3 of them that work hand in hand in the film industry and the GTA will tell you they hate ball nose. They hate it with a passion. The one thing I wanted to discriminate, get off the table here, is that everybody thinks you can't use the J series. And the reason I bring the J series up at all is more and more so all the tie-ins you'll see in locations are becoming J series mounts. So you'll see this guy sticking out of the bottom of a panel, and this will be in a J series format. All of your ball nose males will fit into a J series female, but it won't work the other way. So this guy is universal for your rock and roll J series and your ball nose, and it's legal. So if you see this on a generator, if you see this in a studio, you can plug into this with your regular ball nose cable you get from SetReady, from MBS, from Whites. It's all fine. The cables as well, just so everybody is, we've had a lot of issues in Toronto and the GTA with 600 volt. All your cam locks rated for 600 volt. All your Joy, these plugs are rated for 600 volt. You can legally run 600 volt through a Joy. I say that because you can run 240, you can run 320, you can run 480. 480 is an American standard versus our 600. The cable, the sheathing, this sheathing is rated for 600 volt. It's the cabling on a Joy is what's known as SOOW. It's a hard usage cable. The cabling you see on Camlock, it's called PPC, which stands for portable power cable. All of it's rated for 600 volt. The Camlock itself, 600 volt. So you can do, depending on the Camlock you have, because there are 3 different versions, by the way. There's a 175 amp version, there's a 300 amp version, there's a 400 amp version. Leviton is the one you'll see most likely at White's because it's the cheapest version, and then Hubble is the better quality version, which is why White's and them don't carry it because it's too expensive for them. I use Hubble a lot of the time. But when everybody's like, it's not rated for 600, or they're kind of panicking, everything you see on the film set, 9 times out of 10 is rated for 600 volt. Should we be using 600 volt? If you don't know what you're doing, no. Generator, what you'll notice is, as she was mentioning, you'll see the box on top of the generators coming from White's in them. You might think just plugging in there, you can use the Joy. It won't run an AN. It will not run an AN off a Honda 7K. We have a Predator here today, but same idea. Just think of this as a Honda 7K for 2 seconds. If you take this one right here, which is one of the boxes she was mentioning, and you plugged it into a Honda 7K, what you're going to get out of the end here is Honda invented a breaker. The company invented a breaker, 1986. It's a 22.5 amp breaker. So when you go on that 30 amp plug on the front of the generator, it's not 30 amps. It's 22.5. And even if it was 30 amps, remember this guy pulls 31.5 or 32.5. So even if you have a Joy box on top of a 7K, and you're like, ooh, I have Joy, I can plug a NAN in. No, you can't. You just can't plug a NAN straight into a Honda 7K. You need to have an adapter box. Or what White's and MBS and them are going to tell you is you need a transformer. Because a lot of the guys here probably remember the days of the transformer in front of the 7K, and you bring it in and it weighs like 110 pounds and the thing's annoying as hell. Or instead of a full-size transformer, you take this 2-pound box that weighs nothing. And what this does is it takes the 2 hots from your generator, and it gives you that 240 Joy I was talking about. So with this box, which you can't buy at White's and you can't rent at White's, but you can rent from SetReady and a couple other guys, you can run the NAN on a 7K, or you can run it on the Predator that we have in front of us. But you can't just run the Predator. You just can't run a NAN off the box that White's gives you.
Yeah, so most of the time, like with our different generators, like we were saying, just sometimes pretend this is a Honda 7K, but it's not. It's actually very, very much better. I'll have Jesse explain the science of that, because he was actually explaining the science behind and the math behind it, because I had actually never experienced the Predator before. I've mostly just been using the Honda putt-putts, because in the very odd short-form TV space, all they will give you is your 2, 3, and 7Ks. So basically, 9 times out of 10, most power, I'm gonna over-ask. So we're gonna kind of go a little bit reverse on the generators for this. So for the 7K, 9 times out of 10, I'm kind of max. The max I would want to kind of run off that would be like an M40. That's not really, and that's really pushing it. Like, it's just dedicated to the M40. So think of that more like if I'm running like a couple of like 1200s and stuff like that, then your 7K can do multiple of that. Your 3K is gonna be very, very common on like short form in terms of like little indie shorts, because they're kind of giving out like water, and you're not usually running anything super, super large per se. So like for the 3K, you're kind of pushing it with like a couple of M18s. Your 2K, which is something that I used to only rent for Video Village, and just have that run that in with some battery things. But most of the time you're gonna get what, M18 only out of that guy, and then maybe plug someone's phone in. So the power scale goes up quite fast the second you add multiple fixtures, especially we're adding hard source fixtures or anything that's going to have decent draws. Jesse, did you want to go over the Predator? You were really selling it earlier to me today, and I didn't want to...
No. So the concept here is that a lot of people are starting to go to Canadian Tire and they're just picking up random generators and they're using them. Here's the dealio, is that I'm going to be totally honest. They will work. A regular crap generator you buy from Canadian Tire will work for these lights. But the problem, and the huge problem, is that you'll start hearing a hum coming on the driver for an LED. And they'll start burning out the LED chip, and they'll start burning out the driver. And what'll happen is that if this thing blows up while you're on set, Derek at SetReady has to go through a lot of paperwork. And it is not fun. Yeah, it is just so much fun. So one of the things I was going to mention in Distro was, so there's a little caveat with these lights. And I have talked to ESA, and I did want to mention them. So as I said, it's a 31.2 amp draw, 32.5, depending on how it is. Here's a question for you guys. If I'm plugging it in, where's the breaker on a NAND or an aperture? There is none. So the problem with these lights that ESA, because it's a whole new ground as of last year, technically if you're plugging a Joy into a system and that Joy is running a light that's only 30 amps, it should be on a 40 amp breaker. But we're plugged into a 60 amp breaker right now. There's no protective system in place between the light and the actual Joy itself. Now, according to Aperture and Amaran and all those companies and NAND, there's a heatsink inside of the light. Now, according to wiring section of the electrical code book, that's not sufficient. Because if you ever have an emergency, the only switch you have is an on switch, but that's not a breaker switch for electrical. So when you turn that off and on, there's still power flowing in behind the switch. When you look at a 9K, for instance, you'll see a breaker right on the front of the ballast. The power goes in, goes straight to a breaker, and then goes into the ballast. There's no breaker system on an Aperture. There's no breaker system on a NAND. There's no breaker system on the 25. And these are all running on Joy. But these are the first LEDs ever to run on Joy. So we're kind of in this gray area of like, should we do something? Should we talk to the companies? The other thing too is that if you guys ever look at the wire, this wire isn't regulated by Canada. There's a list in the electrical code book that states all different wire types. So as I was saying, PPC, SOW, SJOW, there's like 30 or 40 different types. The type of wire that you see that actually goes from the 120 supply into the ballast is known as AWM. AWM is a non-regulated wire sheathing in Canada. There's one section, there's one article that was written up that's not technically in the code book that specifies that wire. So even the power feed going into these fixtures is questionable because it's not really, it's in a gray area again. So these fixtures, there may be changes in the next year or so where we may have to run these on 30 amps or like have some type of disconnect system installed before them. So the idea of plugging in like the Aperture and stuff like that just right into a Joy, you may have to do a step down breaker to a 30 or a 40 after you come out of that 60 amp Joy.
So the 3x20, that is the standard one you would get from MBSE. We are actually using it. It's in the corner there. Obviously, feel free to walk by and check. But basically, it's going to be a Joy cable on one side as the input, and then it's going to basically have either three in succession on one side of the face or one on each side. I prefer everything being on the one face. The threes just get really annoying for me, but those are the ones that everyone just has an abundance of. Basically, each one is going to have its own individual breaker on it. So let's say I only need to use two. I don't like to have everything hot off the day just for safety purposes of I don't know what's potentially we're in a field if something is going to kind of wander into an open circuit. I know it might be an ant, but I would prefer, the ant doesn't get electrocuted and burned inside the circuit. Yeah, so then when we have those DEFs, we also have our 3x60s. So those ones are commonly referred to as a silly box. They're kind of the same thing as a 6A box, just with less output. So the 6A box is going to be C-way in, mostly a 5-wire, and then it's going to have 6 outputs of our Joy. And then the outputs on the silly box is going to be 3 individual ones. Usually it's going to be 1 of each leg, red, blue, black. And then for the 6A box, it's going to be 2 of each leg. So obviously, if we're going to be doing a little bit more cable run distribution in terms of like balancing loads, I tend to prefer 6A boxes instead of the sillies, just because I have a few more options, if that makes more sense. I prefer having our cable runs have more options, because you never know what the cinematographer is going to want, because at the end of the day, they are your boss. Sometimes you could have a guy that really, really knows what he or she wants. Some people kind of are like, I'll feel it out on the day. And those are the ones where if I don't make a cable run that is as efficient as possible with little stashes of different types of boxes, connectors, and stuff, I am going to be in so much trouble and all your electricians will hate you. Because nothing is worse than when I'm on the inside of a McMansion and I have to get on the horn and be like, hey, Josh, the DP wants the M90 there. and I'm just pointing through the window, and there's no connectors anywhere near that would power the M90. So that's where you get into the terms of like you want more towers because you have 1 in, 3 out. So I have a couple of options. It's all about being as flexible as possible in your run, and you're choosing the appropriate distro boxes for different fixtures and knowing what you got. So like, let's say we have an M90 and a couple of M40s and maybe this Nanlux. So instead of me praying that the DP only wants to use these guys, we can always step down. We can't really step up per se as elegantly, or kind of really. So if I were to make my main distro run and have a couple of towers and a couple of Seaway on standby at the towers at strategic locations, maybe a 6A box, a couple bits of joy, a little bit of that. If they want the M90 there, beauty, I got what I need. If they want the Nanlux there, beauty, I got what they need. Let's say they only want something that's 1200 watts, or let's say they just want something super, super small. We can go from the tower to the 6A box or to the silly box, and then joy down to a def, and then that's right there. So we have the step downs. Even though that's an aggressive step down, it's flexible enough that I can do that. It's not like I've painted myself in a corner where I have all I have at this place where he wants the M90 is a 3x20 def that'll only take a 1200D. Yeah, that's not gonna work. I would be running an eons amount of cable for that, as well as 5-wire is going to be way heavier. So then you are asking your electricians to run wire like in the mud, and they're gonna kind of be a little mad at you because you didn't pre-plan enough for that request.
One of the biggest fallacies that you'll hear in the entertainment industry is that after 300 feet, we have to run 4-aught. Okay, so a couple things wrong with this. According to the electrical code book, on one of the tables, I believe it's table 16, that actually has to be shorter. So it has to be at like 150 feet, you're supposed to start running 4-aught. In actuality, I am going to say I ran 1,200 feet of Seaway, and I've turned an 18K on, and it's ran perfectly fine. With the LEDs that you see now, you're going to be able to run 1,000 feet of Seaway, and you're not going to have trouble with voltage. If you had, say you rented 5 of these guys, 5 of these Nans, the cheapest way to run 5 of these is you call up Sunbelt or you call up Battlefield, because at some point you're going to need something bigger than this generator. This guy's good. This guy's awesome. You're going to run 1 of them. If you want to run 5 of them, call up Sunbelt, call up Battlefield, call up Stevenson's. Yeah, that's right. I didn't say a single film company. And you just ask for a generator, and you get one of the small ones that goes on, like a little trailer guy. And they're going to be a 100 amp 3-pole breaker. And that's all you're really going to need. Because you're not in the full size stage, but you want to run like 5 of these guys. They'll drop off that generator for like $200. They'll come pick it up, $200. They'll rent it to you, $600. So for like $1,000 for like 2 or 3 days, you've got 5 of these guys running in a field. And I mean, it got dropped off, it's all there. They'll actually give you 300 feet of cable for free.
First off, let's thank Jesse, Gaelen. The amount of insight that you both shared in 40 minutes, I think people spend years trying to learn. So if your brain hurts as much as mine, that's okay.